Okay, so I told you that I would talk about my tool obsession. I'm not really sure how I'm going to do this. I'm not going to sit down and discuss it all in one sitting. You guys would probably be bored to death with me talking. So what I think I'll do is I'll break it up and show you different segments of the toolbox as in between segments of me talking. So let me start out by telling you that I kind of grew up in a very rural community. Um, and at a time when there was no internet, we didn't have cable TV. Actually, in the area that I grew up in, we only had one television station that went off the air at 10 o'clock at night. Um, I grew up in a time when there was no internet, cable television. Kids kind of, we worked on cars and played a lot of baseball, stuff like that. Um, my father and I had a very strange relationship. Neither one of us talked very much. When the two of us were together, there wasn't a lot spoken. But for some reason, for my Christmas presents, I always received tools or something like that. I'm not really sure why he did it. I mean, he wasn't really involved in me working on cars. Usually did it with friends that were into it also. I did it exclusively with friends that were into it. Um, but my father always bought me tools, or I always got something like that as a Christmas present. So my tool thing started at a very young age. One of the things that I remember one time when I was like 12 years old, he gave me a welder for Christmas. Now, it was one of those little Lincoln tombstone welders. But I never really could figure out why he gave me a welder at 12 years old. But it was cool. Um, but anyways, um, so that's kind of where the tool obsession started. Probably is when I was very young. Again, a very rural area, and then. Um, it gets complicated as to my obsession of tools. I After high school started working in a body shop. I had taken body repair in high school when they still had classes. I'm not even sure if they still have shop or whatever in high school, but I had taken auto body repair. There was a choice of auto mechanics or auto body, and um, I thought at the time I probably knew everything about auto mechanics, so I wanted to go into auto body. And I really loved painting cars. Um, that's kind of what I did when I first got out of school. And if anybody is familiar with auto mechanics and auto body, it used to be that you were paid flat rate. That you had a flat rate book, and if you were in auto body, you had a certain amount of time to replace a fender, flat rate. And a lot of shops paid flat rate. So if they said you had 2 hours to replace a fender, you got paid 2 hours, regardless whether it took you an hour or it took you 6 hours. You got paid too. Um, Now there was variations to that. I mean, if there was something that was out of the ordinary that you couldn't do it in the 2 hours, you would get paid at a shop rate for any time over that. But anyways, so having the proper tools was very important to mechanics, and that's why most mechanics have extensive toolboxes. Having good tools is an important thing. I used to buy Craftsman tools, and I always had Craftsman tools, and they always work very good. Now, lately, Craftsman tools have gone downhill terribly. I mean, yeah, they still warranty their tools and you can get them fixed, but um, having the tool break and having to go over and get it replaced or get parts for it. I had actually was working down in New York City one time and had a ratchet break on me, so I went to a Sears store down there. Well, we were staying north of New York City in a hotel. You don't want to, if you're working in New York City, you don't want to stay in a hotel in New York City. You can't afford it. We were staying north of New York City and would drive in every day, but I went to a Sears store up north of New York City. Actually, it was in White Plains, New York, and took the ratchet in, and I had always had him replace a ratchet, and it was a girl, a pretty attractive girl actually, that was working in the tool department, and I gave her the ratchet, and she says, "Oh yeah, that's not a problem." She goes into the back room, comes back out with a bunch of parts in a little plastic bag and says, "Here you go." And I said, "Here I go, what?" And she says, "Well, here's the parts to repair it." And I said, I'm out of town. I don't have the equipment with me to repair this ratchet. Actually, I said something else to her, but I won't get into that. About being a ratchet repairman. But anyways, she ended up giving me another ratchet for it instead of the repair parts. But I regress. You can go into you lose time if things break, and I still like Craftsman, but they're just not any good anymore. So I've got a Mac tool guy that comes by the shop every week and stops by, and I don't have to leave the shop to have stuff repaired. Just give it to him and he'll replace it or get it fixed. And they seem to be good quality tools, and they've got to be comfortable tools too. But anyways, so my obsession started working in the auto industry. Body shop, having the proper tools is one thing. To do it on a flat rate basis, you had to have the right tools to remove a fender, or had the right tools to paint. You had to have the right tools to do everything. Now, I didn't have to buy painting tools, but you had to have mechanics tools, you had to have sanders, you had to have a bunch of stuff. So then I got out of the auto industry and went into fire protection. It's a long story. I love painting, but I kind of worked for this bad dealer. It was a Lincoln Mercury dealer, and I had worked there for like 2 months, fresh out of school, and became the shop manager, and it got terrible. First of all, most of his work was used cars. He would take used cars in on trade for new cars, and there was a lot of rust issues with it, so you spent a lot of time repairing rust, and it got terrible. But anyways, I left that and got into the fire protection industry, and when I got into it, it was still very early on, and we didn't have the tools back then that they have now. We didn't have lifts. We worked off of a scaffold, rolling scaffolds. Now they have what is called grooved or Vic couplings to put the pipe together. Back then, everything was screwed together. Our main size piping was from 8-inch down to 1-inch, and we screwed everything together. We didn't have roto hammers to drill concrete inserts in. We used star drills to make holes for inserts. So you had to have the proper tools back then, and back then you would get the proper tools. And I worked for a couple of different larger companies, Grinnell Fire Protection, back when Grinnell was Grinnell, and they were a great company. They had boxes in their fab plants that they would send out to a job for you, and they would be preloaded with tools for specific jobs. If you were on a concrete job, you had tools for a concrete job. If you were on a wood job, you had tools for a wood job. If you were on a steel job, you had tools for a steel job. And basically those tools consisted of hanging material tools. We were still screwing a lot of pipe together. And then it came along, and those companies broke up, and when I say those companies, it was basically Grinnell and Automatic Sprinkler back then, and they were two very large companies, and we did a lot of work in power plants and large jobs. And let me break it up here. Let me cut this off, and maybe we'll go back and look at some parts of a toolbox, and I'll bring you back for more. Okay, so I told you in a previous video that I was going to show you, I wasn't happy with the screwdrivers being in the screwdriver drawer of my toolbox. Okay, I got interrupted on the first clip. But anyways, what I was talking about is the screwdriver drawer. That used to be the screwdriver drawer, and there's those magnetic strips in there, but it wasn't efficient, convenient. I got screwdrivers in there, but it was kind of like they were all over the place. You know, they wouldn't stay in order, so the tool, and I didn't really have enough of them, so the tool guy came up with a box. Well, actually 2 boxes, and this is the second box. And let me show you this first, because I can do it with a handheld camera, and I'll show you the other one when I put the camera on a tripod. But anyways, here is the second box, and it has all of the screwdrivers that I bought off of Mac in there, plus some that I had, some extra Torx screwdrivers. Now here is the second box, and what I have in there right now is the screwdrivers that I had in the drawer. But I'm actually going to be building another small toolbox over by my welding table, so I'll probably be moving some of these screwdrivers out and putting them in that other box. But let me bring you back after I get this set up on a tripod, and I'll show you, because it kind of has a unique way of opening, and well, it has a unique way of opening. So let me set you up on a tripod and I'll show it to you. Okay, so I've got it set up on a tripod, and I'm going to show you how this thing opens up, and it's kind of unique. The key is in it, and this thing will slide down after you unlock it and open up, and it is unique. Now, the thing that I didn't like about it is, first of all, I could only get the Mac screwdrivers in this thing. It was only big enough to fit the Mac screwdrivers, and because of the size of the slots, the holes some of them were spaced too close together, so the bigger screwdrivers you couldn't set next to each other. They would spawn out because the handles were bigger than the center line of the holes. But what this thing does have, and like I said, I'm going to be moving some of these screwdrivers over to the smaller box that I'm going to set up at the welding table. But this thing has slots in it for pry bars. The pry bars that I have that are very handy, like these pry bars. Now that will go right in there, and you could probably actually get 2 of them into that slot. The other thing that was kind of wrong with this is you couldn't put bigger screwdrivers up on the top, because what would happen was the handles stick up so far. Well, that's not a good example. The handles stick up so far that the lid wouldn't close fully. But again, it worked. I just had to get another one in place of it, so that I could use this one for more convenient things. The screwdrivers that I'm not going to be using in the auxiliary box by the welding table and in the pry bars. Again, this box would be ideal for the pry bars, but I'll bring it back. One of the things that I was talking about is a wrench feeling good, and it's got to feel good if you're going to be pulling hard on it. Now, Craftsman wrenches, the standard Craftsman Ratchet, it is fine for everyday use, but if you start pulling hard on this thing, the thing hurts, kind of. It digs into your skin, and I never wore gloves. So I had bought this ratchet, and because one thing, it's longer, and 2 things, it's got a finer cog on it. There's a lot of places where you get with a ratchet that you're very limited to the amount of space that you can turn the ratchet in. And a lot of times these larger cogged standard ratchets, the teeth spacing isn't enough to get another click out of it to be able to pull again. So I got this finer ratchet with a more leverage on it that feels good. When you pull hard on this thing with this rounded, smooth surface, it doesn't dig into your skin and hurt when you're torquing on something. Now, this ratchet's trashed. Looks fine, seems to work fine, but as soon as you put any torque on it, the thing slips. So I've got to get that. I'll probably take that back to Sears and get it replaced. But when I left off, I was talking about the sprinkler industry changed from big companies. Those big companies kind of went away, and smaller companies came in, and the mentality of how you got stuff out used to be the designers, engineers in the fire protection industry came out of the field and went into design. A lot of times they got hurt, and so they went into office work, and it worked out great because those people knew what you needed and what you needed, and also the fact of how the system needed to be designed so that it would make it easier for you in the field, saving labor. Um, and that mentality got away. They didn't like paying people. Uh, they could get cheaper people, college people coming out and pay them a lot cheaper than they would paying an old fitter or a fitter to design systems. So with that kind of on-hands experience of being in the field for a designer went away, and it became harder and harder to put systems in. You had to change a lot of things because of mistakes that were made, because the person designing the system really didn't have any field experience. So with that being said, things started changing a lot. Instead of having just like a power machine on a threading pipe, now you have, because of the advent of grooved couplings to put systems together, you still needed a power machine, but now you also need a grooving material, and ratchets, things to put the couplings together, those grooved couplings. Started out, we would go out and buy ratchets and sockets to fit those couplings. And then as time progressed, people actually started, and as tool manufacturers progressed and cordless tools came out, so did cordless impacts at a certain point in time. And people started, companies started using cordless impacts, but then, you know, they would bitch about it being too expensive. You know, you can use a ratchet. Well, you can use a ratchet, but I gotta tell you, it's probably twice as fast using a cordless impact on it. And that's where things started going downhill. The tools would come out that you could do the job faster, but people didn't want to pay because they had that mentality of never being in the field and never first-handing experiencing the advantage of having the correct tools for the job. Now, I'll give you some examples. People would send us out on jobs. I mean, I worked for those larger companies, and then I worked for some smaller companies, and you didn't have any tools, and I would you know, complain to them about not having the proper tools, and they would think you were just kind of bitching because they didn't have that first-hand experience. And I can tell you on jobs that I've gone to where they sent you out on a job, and I'll give you an example, and it doesn't have anything to do with hand tools. It's got to do with something else. We were working in a building one time, and we had to make a bunch of penetrations through some, it was an old building, and it was in a crawl space, and you had to crawl back in this crawl space, and we had to make penetrations through this kind of foundation wall, and it was made out of red brick. Foundation wall separating two parts of the building in the basement in a crawl space, except the foundation wall, red brick wall, was 3 foot thick. Now, we had rotohammers, and a lot of times that's what we would do. If you had a red brick wall, you would take a rotohammer, not a chipping hammer, not a chisel type rotohammer. We would take a bitted hammer, usually like 3/8 or a 1/2 inch hole, drill bit on the roto hammer and drill a series of holes and then just chip the red brick out in that hole. So we would go around, make a series in a diameter around the circumference of the hole, drilling a series of holes, and then take a hammer and chisel and chip it out. But we, on that one job, they didn't send us out a roto hammer. They didn't even have a long chisel. We ended up taking rebar, pieces of rebar, and filing it down to make a chisel out of the rebar to chisel through that 3-foot wall. And we didn't do it one time, it was probably 10 times. And I can't tell you how long it took to do that, because you know, rebar worked as a chisel, but it's not hardened. And the end where we were pounding on it with a hammer would mushroom over. The other end would get dull really quick. So having the proper tools is huge in time saving. And that's kind of where it came from. Not having the proper tools only drives me to have all the tools that I can get, anything that I might need. So that's kind of where my obsession came from being in positions where I didn't have the proper tools. And there's a lot of positions out there where you don't have the proper tools, and you're struggling to do things that would be so much easier just with the proper tools. And that's kind of where my obsession came from. So I'll bring you back. Okay, I'm just going to show you a brief video of this. Used to be the screwdriver drawer before I took them out and put it in, and I told you I was going to put my Allen wrenches in here, and that's what I've done. Now I have this this Allen socket set, and it goes up to 19 millimeters metric or 3/4 standard. Then I have this small socket set. This one down here is a Craftsman, and this one up here is VIM. I don't know where. I got it. I think somebody traded it into the Mac Tool guy for something else, so I got it off of him for a real good price. But anyways, so there's my larger ones. I still like them T-handle ones, and ironically the Craftsman one goes up to 10, which is a fairly good size metric Allen wrench. But in their standard size, they only go up to 7/32, is it? Maybe this one, quarter inch. So I think I'm getting another set of standard ones that go up to 3/8, is it? But I'll let you know when I get it. I'm not going to I'll do a toolbox tour again here sometime, but this is where I took them socket sets out of. And this is all going to be ratchets, extensions, breaker bars, speed wrenches, stuff like that, pneumatic wrenches. I'm going to put in there. And this is a drawer that I took the Allen stuff out of, which I will find something for it. Don't worry, it seems to be limited on toolbox space, so I'll find something to go in there. So the other thing that goes along with the tools is toolbox management. And probably in a shop, it is pretty important. I mean, if you've got different people working out of toolboxes or tool storage areas or a tool crib, it's pretty important that you know where that stuff is. And that kind of related to, that's kind of why I got into the fire protection part of it, so that I could relate it to you. We would have gang boxes on the job, and these gang boxes were just kind of big empty boxes. Sometimes they had lids that or were taller and would swinging doors open up and there were shelves inside of them, but basically you got a gang box that was just a big empty tub. Um, Maybe had a little shelf that went across the top of it. And I tried to organize mine so that you could find stuff. I actually had a couple of boxes. Now they wouldn't all go out to a smaller job, but I had a couple of boxes on bigger jobs and would keep stuff organized in it and handy. Now, some guys, you would go to their job and they'd have a gang box, and they would have drills and impact guns and hammer drills, and they would keep them all in those plastic boxes. And you would have to fish through a lot of those plastic boxes, especially Hildy boxes. All kind of look the same, about the same size, so you would go picking through to find which had the drill in it. I would keep my boxes organized, drill bits in one spot, hammer drill bits in another spot for drilling concrete, and so an apprentice or somebody else could come in and kind of open the box and see exactly what there was. There would be a plastic tray with drill bits or a plastic tray with roto hammer bits in it, and I kept the chargers on a shelf, and so that you could have the batteries all charged. You didn't have to dig through the box to find the charger and plug it in someplace. But that's kind of tool management is another big thing if you want to stay productive. You've got to have the right tools, and you've got to have the right tool management. And it kind of reflected into taking stuff up on a lift or up on a scaffold with you too. You know, you didn't want to get up in a lift. Some of the places, one of the last jobs that I did was we had a 135-foot boom lift, and we would go up there, and you would get up there. It'd take a while to get up there. You know, it takes a while for that 135-foot boom lift to get up to 135 feet or 130 feet, 120 feet, whatever you were working at. You would want to make sure that you had all the tools that you could need or that you would need up there with you. You didn't want to have to boom back down. In a lot of places you had to snake that boom in between like columns and over obstructions and over machinery. And sometimes it was hard to get out of those places, so that you kind of wanted to make sure that you had tools with you. Now, this doesn't kind of relate to a shop because you're not in that area, but you want to make sure that your tools are managed in a box where everybody can find it. You have one drawer for certain wrenches, like gear wrenches, ratcheting wrenches. You have a drawer for that, or you have them organized in a drawer so that you have fixed wrenches in one spot and ratcheting wrenches in another spot, maybe metric wrenches in one drawer and standard wrenches in another drawer. But you need to keep stuff organized. And um, even if you're not doing it to save time and money, even you just want to have it organized. So if somebody walks in and you can tell them where that wrench is, and they can go to a spot and don't have to dig through stuff to find it. So that's kind of my take on tools, and my obsession with tools is based on probably a lot of it has genetics, hereditary. It started as a young age. I guess you would call it genetics or hereditary. It started as a young age, but a lot of it has to do with being put in positions where you didn't have the proper tool to work with, and it took you twice or three or four or five times longer to do something than if you had the proper tool, and you're kind of kicking, I'm not going to say kicking yourself in the butt because of it, but maybe kicking somebody else in the butt because of it. It's so stupid to be out on a job and not have the right tools and equipment to work with. And then they're wondering why it's taking you so long. And you try and explain it to them, and a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people in management just don't understand the concept of having the right tools and equipment to do things. So let's leave it at here, and what I'll do is interject some other things into it, but this is the end of it. If you got any questions or comments, just leave them in the comment box. Click that like button and subscribe, and share it if you want to.